All right, welcome to the Grognard Gamers. This is the Grognard Grumbles, the segment of the channel where we'll be talking to different gamers about different old school gaming stuff. Um, I'm your host, Cody Broussard. Tonight I am joined by my co-hosts, Dave Ferguson and Chase Green. And our special guest tonight is Duane Cole. So since this is the first episode, Um, one thing I want to ask everybody to do when they come on this show is tell me about what got you into gaming. Now, I'm going to leave Dwayne Cole to last because this is actually going to be one of the main subjects of discussion tonight. But I'll start. I'll kick it off. So, like I said, I'm Cody Broussard. I got into gaming in the mid '90s, around 1995 or so, when I was about the third or fourth grade. Um, I was introduced to it, um, by a friend in school, um, and it's kinda weird because I got into all aspects of gaming at once, not just role-playing games, but miniature war games, card games, board games. I got into all that all at once. So long story short, basically, I was in school, I was in class, I got up to sharpen my pencil, and I saw this guy in front of me, this really nerdy kid. He was flipping through a, catalog, and I wasn't really sure what I was looking at, but the art looked really cool. And so I stopped when I came back from sharpening my pencil and was like, "Hey, man, what are you looking at there?" And he flipped it over, and it was a Games Workshop catalog, uh, Warhammer 40,000. And he started to explain it to me that it was a miniature war game. And so I got really excited, really interested, and of course, I got in trouble for interrupting the class and everything else. And then, but later that day, he started to explain it to me enthusiastically. And then another friend we had in class was like, "Well, I have this other game that I'm really into. It's called Dungeons and Dragon, or back then we called it Advanced Dungeons and Dragon." And so the next day, he brought the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Second Edition Monsters Manual to class, and that was my introduction to role playing games and war games all at the same time. And ever since then, I've been hooked. So briefly, that's kind of my story of how I got into gaming. Dave Ferguson, how did you get into gaming?
It was by accident. My first try at gaming, I hated it. Sit in some guy's living room just with a piece of paper, somebody rattling off abilities and names, all this kind of stuff. It made no sense. There was about 12 of us. A couple of years later, I had a buddy that got me into Palladium, playing TMNT and After the Bomb. And then slowly after there, sometime in the late 80s, we got into AD&D second edition. So I feel a little funny calling myself or being associated with a Grognard channel, because I feel like I'm a little more new school, having started with, Palladium and AD&D second ed. But yeah, that was how it happened.
Well,
Late
it's
80s with a couple of
I
different systems.
I'd still consider that kind of grognard, even though I kind of call the channel that kind of tongue in cheek, even though I'm probably the youngest one here. I get regularly called a grognard, even though I'm really not. How old were you, Dave, when you got into gaming?
So I was born in 78. I started gaming, it was around fourth, third or fourth grade. And the first games were by accident with an ElfQuest rule book and some magazines I can't even remember that had these dinosaurs running around with laser guns and high tech weapons. It was completely asinine, but third and fourth grade me, it was amazing. I can't remember exactly what grade I was or how old I was, but it was roughly about third or fourth grade.
Gotcha. About the same age as me then. Um, my other co-host, Chase Green. When did you get into gaming?
I actually got into gaming a little bit later than you guys in my life. I was a freshman in high school and was in band, and they kind of drug me into one of the side rooms, and we had played second edition, which of course I didn't know anything about at the time. But that was kind of a one-shot thing where I played a ranger, which was a lot of fun. From there, the next actual like campaign setting was also during freshman year, which was actually a Star Trek game. If you can believe that one, it's a little odd. And from there, I picked up card games, and I've dabbled in a little bit everything here or there. Which again, freshman year would have been '98 for me, so very much later than most people.
Right on. And then we're going to go right into it. And this is going to be one of our main topics tonight is we're going to be talking to our guest. And we have Duane Cole with us, who's actually is, I would consider a real grognard, an old school gamer. And Duane, I want you to tell us how you got into gaming and when you got into it.
Well, thanks for having me, Cody. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm a little bit older than you guys, but still young at heart. I started when I got into it in 1974, 1975 in Southern Illinois, SIU, which was in Carbondale, Illinois. A lot of people are probably familiar with that because the infamous and most worldly known person is Tim Kask. And Tim Kask was, obviously people know him through Dragon Magazine, but I knew him first in Carbondale when he was with a group of people, a group of gamers called the Egyptians. And if anybody knows anything about Carbondale, they'll know that the Daily Egyptian was a paper for Southern Illinois and the university. And I think that's pretty much where he got started. And you can certainly go back and look at his interviews. And I think he talks a little bit about his time in Carbondale and how he got started. Well, I was there and I got a chance to see a whole bunch of gamers, not just him, but there was a big gaming group there, and especially for Dungeons and Dragons and wargaming. So my father was a student there, and he used to drop me off. And back then, it was normal, even though I was, my gosh, third grade, which I would have been, 7 or 8, and he would drop me off, and I would explore the whole university. And I spent a lot of my time in the library and on this exploration, and it was a very large university. In this exploration, I happened upon this this room with a bunch of gamers. So I naturally walked in, and I was not a shy person back then. So I walked in and just sat at a table and watched them, listen to them, and I was blown away. It looked amazing to me, just even listening to them. So
Wait, what year was this?
this would have been 1974-1975.
So were they playing D&D?
I can't, so long ago, I don't remember. I know they were using figurines. I know it was some kind of fantasy. So, it could have been that they were running it from the brown box. I don't know. It's been so long ago, I just remember being there and knowing the name Cask and then getting Dragon and realizing who I have been watching. This was later on that I discovered it, because I discovered that he was the editor for Dragon. So it was pretty cool to find out.
Yeah, that's a cool story.
But yeah, that was my introduction, and I certainly was introduced to later on when I actually got into the gaming part of it and not just watching it. I was introduced to the Holmes edition, obviously. That would have been 1976 or 77, somewhere in there.
And that was the first version you picked up?
That was the first version. Although I had played the white box, so I did play with a group of older students at the university. I played with them, the white box, but but I was more into it in the Holmes edition because I had a couple neighborhood kids that that I introduced it to because I got the Holmes edition and introduced it to my neighborhood kids because I know you guys know this, but I went to an all black school, so there was zero interest in Dungeons and Dragons, and it was frustrating because I was the only one that was interested in it.
Right.
I was the only nerd. There was really no such thing as a nerd back then, but
Mhm.
I was a nerd and introduced it to my neighborhood kids, got them involved, and that's how we progressed all the way up to 1980 with AD&D.
So
So
did you incorporate AD&D with the Holmes? Because
no,
the first
once
thing come out was the Monster Manual, correct?
yeah, it did. No, actually, once the Monster Manual came out, we didn't really incorporate. We didn't sit down and really try to figure out, well, how do we get this, Monster Manual incorporated into the Holmes edition. We knew that all three books were coming out. It was already known, so it wasn't like it was a mystery. But we were itching to get it.
Yeah.
But we continued with the basic. So we just you know my neighborhood kid was the DM. He really took on to it really really well. He was quite a bit nerdy than me, and maybe a little bit smarter too. So he was able to really master running a full campaign, whereas I was more the player. I was more interested in playing. He was more interested in DMing. So the Monster Manual came out. We were intrigued and we were studying it all along, and but we did not incorporate any of the AD&D stuff. In fact, we didn't incorporate and didn't really even play AD&D until 1979 when that last book came out, the Dungeon Master's Guide.
Right.
So it was a long wait, but boy, was it worth it. It just, exploded. We were, caved off in a basement playing, just basic edition. And rules weren't like they are now. They weren't set in stone. It was kind of an open book. We didn't look at AD&D like, oh, there's an advanced style of play. We only looked at Dungeons and Dragons with how we had been playing it, how it evolved from the brown box all the way to the Holmes edition, and we actually did have kind of our own rules that we came up with. Although we were rules as written, although there were
Right.
some rules that weren't written that we had to write ourselves, and that's why we were looking forward to the advanced edition coming out. So
Yes. So tell me a little bit about you were saying it was difficult to find people to play with, which back then I imagine it was. Um, you but it seems like you got a group together. So who was your group back then and how did you find them?
So I was bused into an all black school, so it wasn't like my
Mm.
neighborhood was all black, um, so we had a few neighborhood guys that were just gamers in general, and so it took probably a good 2 years to get a bunch of the neighborhood kids to even be excited about it, and once they were excited and they would sit in and try it, they were hooked right away. Because my neighborhood kid, he lived just two doors down from me, so we'd sneak out of the house and we'd go and uh, cause all kinds of problems at the university. And there's a story behind that as well with AD&D. Uh, but yeah, we had about a group of four, sometimes five. So he had a brother that was a little bit younger than us, and yeah, your typical scenario that you see,
Right.
a bunch of guys sitting around with Cokes and Mountain Dews and chips, and I'd be in the basement on a ping pong table. We'd have little
Yeah.
minis.
Yep.
Sometimes, we didn't have like the minis, but we made, army men that were,
Yeah.
we had army men and uh, little monsters that we had from other games that we had, and Battlestar Galactica and some Star Wars creatures. So yeah, so we actually But we were full on. I mean, we'd go to the university bookstore and, we'd buy the modules, and it was tough because we didn't make much money, and our parents were all typically poor back
Mhm.
then. My dad was in law school, so he didn't have any money. He quit working and lived off of the sales that he had from his homes, and lived for 4 or 5 years off of just that income, till he could become a lawyer, and that's what he did. So no, it was a great time, especially where I was at. Southern Illinois, in Carbondale, was a hotbed for Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know why. It just seemed to trickle down from that Midwest, and it went all the way down through Chicago, and then came down to the U of I, and then right
Yeah.
down to Carbondale.
You were
And
definitely in the thick of it.
we were, and I think the reason was because the computer systems that we had, um, at the time, the university computers, they were connected, and they were connected via internet, even though there was no such thing as the internet back then in the 70s. We still had this system of Plato, which is called Plato,
Right.
and those were the first Dungeons and Dragons computer games. So
Yeah,
you
you
can
might wanna explain this to some of the younger crowd, because I'm sure there'll be, a lot of some younger people that'll be listening to this that don't remember the mainframe computers and all that, so
Never had a time before the internet.
yeah. So before the internet, before floppy disks, we had punch cards. Um, I mean, it goes all the way back. Fortran and basic programming languages, and this is one thing that we were involved in as well. Not just Dungeons and Dragons, but the computing in at the university level. And so we got involved in this system because it was an educational system through the university. It started at the U of I, and then it came down to Carbondale and went up to Chicago, and they were all connected, and they were trying to expand it throughout the world. They were trying to, get it into every country, into every school.
right.
But it was very expensive, and so they would get us on there, and we were in the math club, so they loved having us. So we were the beta testers, and so they got us on these systems, and we were beta testing the Plato system. It's Plato, and it's got some meaning behind it, but it's a learning and education system. But you could play games on there as well, and so you could fly an F-16 against somebody off in Champaign Urbana while I'm 350 miles away.
Yep.
And we could text message each other. We could send emails. So it was a full system. I mean,
Yeah.
it had 3D. They were vector graphics, but it was 3D, and that's really where it all got started. And they had several games on there. One of them being a Dungeons and Dragons game, which was great because we were also into Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
So it
Now
all
was
kind of
this
tied in.
was this, like an early roguelike game?
Um, this was well, it was the basic. It had basic rules in it. It had the
Mhm.
basic rules. It was a top down, kind of a you walking through, tunnels and mazes, and the walls would appear. You couldn't see, 20 feet in front of you,
Right.
and then they would appear, and there's a monster there, and you'd fight the monster, and it used the OD&D rules.
Yep.
Um,
So
and
this
it
was
was
kind of the precursor of early computer gaming like, Ultima and all that. This is kinda where it derived from.
way before,
Yep.
yeah. So it was
Yep.
way before Ultima because,
Mhm.
obviously Ultima was like 1982 or 3.
Right. Yep.
This was, 1976,
Yeah.
77, and yeah, way before that. But it was a plasma screen, which was interesting because everybody thinks, oh, the plasma screens of today. Yeah, they had plasma back then too, and
Right.
it saw its resurgence, 10 years ago when the big screen plasma screens came out as the big screen TVs. Same technology, really high resolution. I mean, because those plasma screens, they were orange, they had an orange glow to them, but they were plasma and they looked really good.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear that. So basically, everybody in that tabletop gaming community was kind of involved in this computing community as well, right?
Yeah, they were. So
Yeah.
most of the students that we played with, and that's how we got in, is we would game with them, and at night, everybody was programming on they were IBM VM 370 terminals that were connected to the mainframe. So
Yep.
we'd go in and we didn't have access, but we were hackers, so we were
Mhm.
pretty clever about getting passwords. I consider we were probably one of the first hackers back then trying to steal passwords so that we could stay on the system. Because you did have to enter your username and password, and we created a pseudo screen that showed it. And when a professor or a student would walk up and enter their username and password, screen would
Mhm.
go blank. Meanwhile, it would send that username and password to our account that we had, and we just maintained accessibility. And sometimes it was a professor's, and we could see all the students' grades and scores and everything, and it was uh,
Real
eye-opening.
real life war games.
Kind of, yeah. We
Yeah.
did have with the Plato system, you had to use a coupler modem, so you had to dial a phone number. You'd hear the tone,
Yep.
and then you'd pop it in the coupler, and you'd be connected. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's how we connected.
That's awesome. So back to the tabletop gaming. Did your group you played with, how long did you play with those guys?
Oh, all the way to 1981.
Um, did you did you quit at that point, or did you find a different group after that?
No, so when finally when in 1979 the first when the first book came out, I didn't even have the monster manual. I didn't have Dee Dee's Endemic. I didn't have any of that stuff. And because I tried to get my parents to buy it for me, but we were poor, and
Mhm.
they were expensive books. Especially if you wanted to get all of them.
Oh, yeah.
So some of the kids actually did get the book, like one or two books here, but nobody was into sharing their here. Can I borrow your book for?
Right. Yeah.
No, that didn't happen. But so my goal was I was going to do anything to get it. So what I did was, and don't tell law enforcement about it, but uh, so there were escalators that would go up in the university, and at the bottom of the escalator were a bunch of candy machines. So I would take my chewing gum and put all of the lids of the candy machines, I would stick them so that when a student would come and put money in the machine and it tried to give back their change, of the change that would drop through would drop on top of the lid, and they'd put their hand in there and not realize that the lid was propped up with a stick, piece of gum. And so I'd watch, and every time I'd run back down, grab the change, and then put the gum back in and wait for all the students to, and it was quite busy. So
Yeah.
I was quite busy. I was, a little sneaker. And
That's that's how you got all your books, huh?
yeah, so I would take all that money and I'd bury it in the woods at the campus. I didn't want to get caught with a whole bunch of, and change was heavy.
Right.
So I had this all this treasure buried in the woods, uh, right on the side of the campus there. And yeah, I mean, it was there for a good 4 or 5 months. I did this for about 4 or 5 months until I could finally. I went into the bookstore, the university bookstore, because this is where they had all of the books, all
Right.
the books, all the modules, all the stuff. It was just all there, dice, you name it. And finally, I went in there with just the right amount of money, and it was all change. The guy's like, "Are you kidding me?" So I bought all the books. I bought a few modules. I bought a bunch of dice, and this was 1979, or summer
Yep.
of, and that's when everything changed for me. I went deep reading mode. That's all I could think about. It's all I did, and from then on, we started playing advanced Dungeons and Dragons,
Yeah,
and
it's kind of interesting you bring up the university thing because everybody I've talked to in the 70s, it seems like that's where, role playing games caught on was at the university. And most of those guys I talked to back then, they said they couldn't even get a hold of the books, so, they were talking about, and I was kind of wondering if you had the same experience. They were talking about, photocopies were the biggest thing in circulation. That's how they first got introduced to the game, to Dungeons and Dragons, was through, pirated photocopies. Did you ever see anything like that?
well, believe it or not, we didn't have that kind of accessibility to photocopy. We didn't have a Kinko's, and we didn't have a copy shop that you could go
Mhm.
to and say, "Hey, could you copy this for me?" We didn't have that.
Yeah.
So uh, so we didn't. No, we didn't even have that. Um, we had the real books. We didn't think in terms of photocopies or any of that stuff. Now maybe they had it, but we didn't have access to it.
Right.
It would have been nice. No, if we were going to do anything like that as far as copying, it was done on the deck writer, which is a computer machine. It's a computer with keys, but it's more like an old school typewriter where the paper would feed up through it. And so we would create the program, and everything was text based. So if we were going to copy something, we hand typed it in word for word, and then reprinted it out on deck writer paper, which has green and white stripes, very light green,
Yeah.
but it was more for computer programming language. But we would type it out on the computer at night as far as copying, and that's how we did the OD&D stuff.
Right.
But we all had copies of the Holmes book, because you didn't have to buy the box. You could go to the store and actually get the blue book, just the blue book. So you didn't
Right.
need the box. And some of the guys had just the books, and some of us had the whole box. But no,
Very
everything
cool.
was hand. That's why I'm such a good typer.
Well, I kind of did the same thing, because, again, I didn't have access. Um, my parents weren't going to give me the money to buy D&D books. And so, I'd go into the bookstores with a notepad and physically copy it down, you know.
You,
Uh,
you were more bold than I was.
yeah. I'd spend hours in the bookstore. My mom was more than happy to drop me off at the bookstore because she thought I was reading, you know, books. But actually, what I was doing, yeah, I was reading books, but I was reading D&D books, and copying down the whole rule books, so I could have the rules.
That's
Um,
yeah. No, I tried that, but
yeah.
I'd get the, "Hey kid, you can't do that. Get out of here. Come on. Buy a book or get out of here."
Dave, Chase, did you guys have any questions for Dwayne about the old days?
Uh, Again, going back to your groups, did you ever have anyone like drop out? You had times where like you couldn't get enough players that you tried to pick somebody up new. How would that be handled?
That's a really good question. And the answer is absolutely not. We would drop everything, even if we were having a blast, to go and play D&D. It was the kind of thing where it was a given that anybody would, even if they were grounded or in trouble, they'd sneak out or whatever. We'd get together, and it was a in the summer, it was an everyday thing. It wasn't a once a week thing. We did it every day, and we did it for as long as we could get away with it, until the parents would either scream our names from across, the 3 blocks down, or they'd call, or we just knew the lights of the of the street lights would come on, and then it was probably getting close to the time to going home. But yeah, there were some weekends where we'd be we'd be up 1 and 2 in the morning. And then if we felt like things weren't done, we'd sneak out on our bikes. We'd had our 10-speed bikes. We'd sneak out of our parents' houses and hoik everything to the university. And the university was open 24/7. And we would meet in one of the they had like meeting rooms upstairs at the university, and we would play there. If and sometimes, boy, we'd get in deep trouble, but parents just couldn't stop us, man. We were At least we weren't out, throwing rocks at street lamps or whatnot or windows. We were just playing D&D, and they knew it, and they were okay with it after a while.
Yeah, so Dwayne, I know you're a massive. I'm just going to bring this up because I know it's one of your favorite games. I know you're a massive Roll Master fan, uh, which I am too. So when did you? And I know you got into it when the system basically first came out, right?
I did, yeah.
So tell me about that. When did you discover Roll Master, and what turned you on to that over Dungeons and Dragons?
Well, we had been getting the Dragon magazine, and the Dragon magazine had it wasn't like it was in the 80s when they were constantly. I think Ice actually had took out the whole entire back page for the rest of its life. But before that, there was actually a little tiny ad for Rollmaster and I don't remember which edition. It must have been like 1978 or 79, maybe 80. Those years get mixed up because there was a lot going on back then. There was so much going on in AD&D, and so many guys were getting into it that those years kind of mesh together. But I had seen the ad, and because I had a subscription to the magazine, and I saw the ad, and I was like, "Hey, check this out! They have like these rules, and any rules that you could get a hold of was totally cool. You wanted to, you want. We were all rules enthusiasts, so we loved rules. We liked reading them and possibly implementing them. So when ICE had this new system out, it was like, oh, let's check it out. And I bought it, and probably with some of the leftover change that I had
Now, was this the first edition
acquired.
of Roll Master?
What's that? First
Was
edition.
this yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So this came in a Ziploc, and I think later they came out with the box edition, but the one that I got was like it was a Ziploc, and it wasn't like anything you go, oh my god, this is awesome. It was it was tough to decipher. It was very difficult. But once we started implementing it, it became kind of a standard thing that we had next to us. The
So y
criticals were important.
so you just kinda tacked that on to your regular AD&D games?
Yes, we did. Yep.
Now, did you eventually move on to just using Roll Master over AD&D?
Well, Rollmaster didn't come out with their full system until like, oh gosh, maybe 82,
Right,
83.
right.
And so I was no longer living in Carbondale at that time. I moved to Reno because my dad wanted to practice law in Reno when he had graduated. And so I went to Reno High School, and it was tough. I was still that nerdy kid, but girls started becoming a little more appealing to me. And but when I'd get home, that I didn't go out, I didn't do anything. I read and read and read. I had all my AD&D stuff, and I was kind of sad because I'd lost the group I had been gaming with for so long. It was a sad day when I left.
Yeah.
So me trying to get people back into the game was very difficult because I was the new kid. I was quite nerdy, and guys were like, "Yeah, I'm going out with a chick tonight. I'm not interested in playing D&D. Sorry, man." You get that for so long, and then it's tough. But I did
Yeah.
have a couple guys that I gamed with. I got really deep into the Rollmaster setting, and was really kind of just I was by myself at that point when it came to Rollmaster. Every now and then I'd get somebody that was like, "Yeah, let's play," and we'd play. And um, but through high school, as you know, a lot of guys are like things start turning around,
Right.
becoming a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
Chicks and guitars, and impressing any chick that you could. That was the thing. And Dungeons and Dragons. For me, it wasn't impressing not one chick. In fact, it was like the anti-chick magnet.
Chick
You know,
repellent.
you mentioned D&D and you were out. No
Right.
cheerleader was gonna hang out with you, and everybody wanted the cheerleader. I did.
Right.
So yeah, I didn't talk about D&D much at my high school. So, but boy, I'd go home and it was all D&D. I was still really heavy into it.
Yeah. So you did lose interest in it.
I created characters. I read. I pretended like I was playing against. I was DMing. I was doing it all. Because until I started getting dates, that's what I did. And then I got my Commodore 64, and I started programming my own role playing game. And there were new paths that were being created, and so sticking with the books was kind of too old. The digital realm was starting to become huge. Personal computers, the Apple, Commodore 64, all this stuff. So that's really where it was going. And people weren't interested in sitting down with a book and a piece of paper anymore and a pencil. That was ridiculous. You get on a
That's
computer.
kind of interesting to hear. Even in the early days of computing, huh?
Yeah, it was. No, books were no longer. Nobody was interested in it. It was all computing, and that was unfortunate. And I think today we see a bit of a different. There's this resurgence that's come about, and we can talk about that later. But
Yeah.
no, everybody was into the role playing games that were happening on the computers, and so it hurt the hobby. Whether or not they want to say it hurt it or added on to it, in my experience, it hurt the hobby. Nobody was interested in getting together in a bedroom or a basement. It was, let's go and sit on a computer and figure this out. And people would watch behind my back because I had my own computer, and they'd come over and they'd watch me play some of the, what is it, SSI games that they came out with. And I had them all. I still have them to this day, and they're still quite interesting to play. But yeah, no, it was when the girls weren't coming over, I wasn't taking a girl out. The guys would come over, and that's what we do. And then it turned into guitar. I'm a guitarist. I'm a musician, so that was my focus from then on. And that's when D&D second edition came out, and it started losing my attention to it.
Yeah. So I have a bunch more questions, but I'm going to turn it over to the co-host, Chase and Dave. Did y'all have anything else you wanted to ask?
Go ahead with the question, Dave.
Thank you. So actually, Duane, I've got just a list of questions where I just would love to hear your ramblings. In general, just your thoughts on mechanics. So outside of just the RP element of the game, and thinking back to your OD&D, AD&D, and Rollmaster days, what is it that you look for in mechanics in a game that kind of makes you say, "Yeah, I want to play that"?
So we weren't really role players, because we were never introduced to that style of gaming. It wasn't on TV. It wasn't introduced as like role playing, like you get into character as a an elf or whatever. It was it was more about the mechanics, because we weren't very good actors at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. We just were terrible actors, so we didn't even try. So it was really about the mechanics. It was really about who could outmaster the dungeon master, who could outmaster him on the rules, And so those rules really became important to know, because in order to, stop the DM from, you know, running you off of a cliff, which was common back then, because you'd get this power play of a DM that he thought, well, I'll kill your character right off the bat. There was never this balance. Let's balance everything. It was always the player against the DM, and you as a player had to play lawyer to defend your character. And with defending it, it was through rules. And if you let the DM step all over you or push you off the cliff, then you were the sucker. So it was really important back then to know the rules, to know if the DM was overstepping his bounds, which he did so often, especially in my group. And because it was, you'd get some rivalry, and the DM didn't like you one day and he'd try to kill off your character. Well, you better know those rules. So that's where mechanics and balance became important. So we were rules lawyers. We had to be, in order to defend our characters against a vicious 13-year-old DM that thought he was God.
Absolutely. And so, I mean, thinking about that, Cody had brought this up. You went away from AD&D and were really attracted to Rollmaster. So would you kind of go into what was it about Rollmaster, its mechanics, and I guess character options that attracted you?
Yeah, the complexity. After you've read the DM guide, the the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Player's Handbook, and you've read everything 100 times over, after a while you're looking for more material. Dragon certainly gave that to us. Dragon was great. It was fantastic. I look forward to getting that every month. It was just fantastic. Towards the end there, it got a little bit goofy. But those early editions, all the way from, gosh, I think it started in 75 or 76. All those editions, all the way through, I'd say up until 1980, 82, 83. I really dug them. After that, they started getting a little bit, strange. They started adding too much computer game stuff into it, and too many other games that were out there. So I think they spread themselves too thin. It started
Yep.
reaching out into other areas, and you'd get maybe 2 or 3 pages of what you were looking for as a Dungeons and Dragons player, and that was it. And then everything else was like, yeah,
So they kind
booklet.
of lost their identity during that time.
They did. And during that time, they started pushing, computer games, which was their downfall. They should have been anti-computer games. But how do you do that, when everything is being rushed into a electronic age? You either get on or you sink. And I think their idea was, well, let's get on instead of sinking. And I think they did okay for a while, but in the end, you see where it went. But for Rollmaster, for me, it was all about new material that I could add on to, you know, some of the mechanics. And then after a while, it was like, well, when they came out with their own set of mechanics, it was just so intriguing, because right at that point, I was developing my own game on my computer system, so I was writing a new game, and I started writing for a Rollmaster.
Now, were you writing a computer game, or were you writing a tabletop game?
Yeah, I was writing a computer game.
Yeah.
And this was this was my high school project. So I wrote the game, and it worked. It was
Yep.
it was like an Ultima version, but it had the Rollmaster style rules in it, and it was very complex.
Is that
And
still hanging around somewhere?
it is, actually. I have it on a disc. Yeah,
Oh,
I do. I
we
have
I wanna see this.
it. Throw it in emulator mode and
Yeah, this is an
watch it.
artifact we need to dust off, I think.
Watch it explode on the internet, right? I doubt it. I really doubt it, because there was some broken parts to it. But that's what got me into it. And so it wasn't me playing Rollmaster with a whole bunch of guys, because really, honestly, I can only get one or two guys at a time to play. And most of those times it was like 4 or 5 hours, and then we'd be off, drinking beers, partying, playing guitar, hanging out with chicks, and sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That was the early '80s for me, and Van Halen and that. um, Eruption was the thing, man. That's what did it for us. Eruption,
Yeah.
and
So speaking of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, I know you're a musician and a quite accomplished guitar player.
oh, well, thank
Um,
you.
yeah, and I know you're also a lover of fantasy and an avid reader. So as am I. And you also love movies. What inspired you musically and literary and film wise? In your gaming and just otherwise. Because I know you're an artist as well. So, um, what inspired you in all that?
Yeah, so well, this would have been right around the time that I discovered D&D, which was 1974, 75. I got those Frazetta books, and they're famous now. I think most people have them. If you don't, you better pick them up.
Oh yeah,
Volume 1, Volume 2. Those were the books that my dad got, because my dad was an artist, so he was inspired by Frazetta. And I was looking at him going, "Oh my god, this is amazing. It goes with Dungeons and Dragons." It was just everything, that's where your mind went when you started imagining, these deep dark dungeons and priestesses and all that. All you had to do was open up a Frazetta book and boom, there it is. Um, as far as movies, the movies didn't really they didn't have an impact on me because they weren't refined enough for me to appreciate. Obviously you had Jason and the Argonauts and you had that kind of stuff, but that was all, I mean, that was all 60s kind
yeah,
of claymation, maybe
yep,
70s, early 70s claymation. And so it wasn't like you were experiencing this, wow, this is amazing, uh, kind of moment, because it had already been done. But reading Edgar Rice Burroughs and all these, I had read, what was it, the Stephen Donaldson.
yep,
I had read that series. That was certainly beginning, and then I got into The Hobbit because my mom was a fantasy. She read all the books,
oh yeah,
and
okay,
she didn't share anything about it. We didn't really talk about it too much, but I knew that she was into the Dragon Riders of Pern and all. So our whole library, and we had a huge library. Most of our library was filled with my mom's fantasy. She was into fantasy stuff, so
oh wow,
I I read them. So I read The Hobbit, for the
hmm,
first time, and oh, this would have been 1973 or 74. So I had already known, that whole fantasy thing and dragons and all this stuff. So I was already, when Dungeons and Dragons came, I was like, oh, this is like The Hobbit.
right,
I loved it. So
yep,
that kind of thing. And then the cartoon The Hobbit, I think that was like 1976 or 77 that came out. So that kind of stuff, it was inspiring. It was cool during the time. Yes, we latched on to everything that came out, but there wasn't really all that much that came out that was like so fantasy. It was all, the 70s was like, oh god, the 70s series they were just awful.
hmm,
They were, I thought they were awful even back then, um the soap operas, those were on half the time, most of the day. They depressed me. I did not like it, so it was very easy to go into my room and start reading. And that was the inspiration, all that stuff, all the media that was out then, and it was not like what we have today. You know, it was very sparse. So
right,
you looked for it everywhere you could find it, whether it was a comic book.
yep,
Certainly the Conan comic books were amazing.
yep,
Savage Sword of Conan. That was the inspiration there as well. Comic books certainly, but There wasn't so much sword and sorcery besides Conan. Um, so you looked, you hunted, and it was an adventure to find it. And when you found it, it was like you'd go to all your friends and go, "Hey guys, check this out! Look what I found!" And they'd be like, "Whoa, that's awesome!" So the discovery was a discovery. It was an adventure, and you when you discover something, you'd share it, and it was a true discovery, and it was rare, and it happened when it happened. It was special.
Yeah, that's something that's really missing from today, I think. I'm not that old, but even when I was younger, that was a big deal, right? You discover a new book or a new album or a new movie, and everything was a kind of a mystery, right? Because you didn't have
It was. There was
yeah,
less commercialism than we have today, and
right,
everything that we have today is mass produced in the millions, if not billions, like fifth
hmm
edition books today.
right.
Billions of them are everywhere. You see them everywhere, and they don't hold the unique, special thing that you know that that say the first edition had, or even OD&D had. Those were really
Oh yeah,
special. When you saw them, they were cool. You wanted to look at them, you wanted to touch them, smell them. It was it was just
yeah.
there was everything to them that was just this mystery. And today, there's not so much of that,
Nope.
and it's kind of sad because we're over commercialized through media.
Well, everything's so accessible, you know,
Yeah.
and especially when you grew up, everything was not, so everything was new, you know. Um, Another question I had, I know that, and this probably doesn't ring true for everybody, but it does certainly ring true for me and many others. I know that role playing games and gaming in general had a big impact on my life. Did it have a big impact on you, and how so?
Huge.
Yeah.
It was everything. It's really kind of where my guitar playing got started. So when I started playing guitar, and I started playing at a really early age. This was before Dungeons and Dragons. Um, you'd see the album covers, you'd see the Yes album cover, and that's really what sparked kind of the magic and mystery of it all. Even like some of the bands that would talk about adventures and mystery and the dragons, we had it back then in the 70s. So it all compounded into eventually being, oh, this is Dungeons and Dragons. We had been prepared for Dungeons and Dragons for all these years that we'd been listening to some of the music about Dungeons and Dragons. And so uh the inspiration was definitely there. And um I think it had everything to do with my music playing today. Even today, now when I hear something, I look for, is it Dungeons and Dragonsy? you know, does it
Right.
have that? Does it have that mystery? You know, is there a warrior in it that's saving a princess? Is there a monster of some sort? That's what I like, and that's what I listen for. Um, certainly a lot of the albums that I listen to are more kind of neoclassical, uh, which surrounds itself with mystery and adventure and all things that are fantasy. And you can look at even like Ingve was a huge influence to me. His album
Mhm.
cover is what did it for me. When I saw the album cover, he's holding this guitar and there's dragons flying over his head. That album cover is just amazing. It is
Oh yeah.
so Dungeons and Dragons that what Dungeons and Dragons fan wouldn't buy an Ingve album? so
Right.
so I bought it, and sure enough, there's this badass singer on it, badass guitar playing, and that's what inspired me to really focus on becoming the best guitar player that I could, and surround myself with fantasy and adventure and all things that started started me on this path in the first place.
Awesome. Uh, Chase and Dave, do you have any other questions?
Well, that was music. Dwayne, I've heard you talk before about you really enjoyed like the Iliad and the Odyssey. So, what was it about those? I guess that inspired you, and along that line, what were some of the other writings that inspired you?
Well, when I started um, my college, my 2 years of college, so I went to a community college. I had to travel about a half an hour, 45 minutes to get to it, but um, on the way there, I would listen to all my music. It was fantastic. I was, really into guitars, and then I would get there and I took Shakespeare and I took literature, and I had the best teachers you could ever hope for as far as inspiration. So when it got into, what should I be reading, what kind of things you know, are really important for me achieving whatever goal I want to achieve. What do you think are the most important uh, books to read? And so my teachers kind of introduced me, and so did my father. He's an English major. He did a whole bunch of literature, and we had this huge library. And but so when I heard the Iliad and all the Greek classics and Homer and um, Dante's Inferno and Milton and all these classical things that had fantasy before there was such a thing as fantasy. Those are the things that really, when I read them, it was like, wow, how could I not have found these back when I was, a kid? How did I not read these things? So it was a continued discovery. And I don't mean to say that, discovery today is any less than it was back then, because there are certainly a lot of things that you can discover today that, you know, colleges probably push you away from. They don't want you to read these things. They don't, don't pay attention to those. Read these. But, if you can get your mind set in, what were the things that made people inspired to create Dungeons and Dragons, or to be this kind of musician, or to draw these kind of comics. It's all there. It's all you're able to discover it, and even easier because of the internet. So those were the books that in college really continued my feeling like I was discovering something new. So yeah, Homer and all that stuff was really exciting to read again and discover something that you thought maybe you had read everything. You'd read everything, all the Edgar Rice Burroughs, all the Conan books. No, there's so much out there that you just go, wow, how could I not have found this? So there's still stuff out there that people should pay attention to and not let them fall to the wayside.
Right.
Because the new stuff, I have to be honest, the new stuff is kind of garbagey. It's not well written. It doesn't feel like it's well written. It feels like it's rehashed. And so to go back to the originals and to see where those kind of stories came from is the discovery.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would say
Uh,
that a lot of the newer stuff it's safer because they've seen how well the originals did, and they want to make the quick buck off of it themselves sometimes.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good authors out there, and but there's more bad authors because they are able to um, produce and print their own stuff and throw it up where people can buy it, and it's just easy to access a lot more crap than it was back then. If you had something published back then in the 60s, 70s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, you were really criticized on your work. It was really gone over, fleshed out. There wasn't this mad dash to get it out on you know uh, in PDF form on Drive Through RPG for somebody to read and go, oh, that kind of stunk.
right.
but there's more of that out there than there is the really quality stuff. And I'd say the quality stuff really comes from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. It started getting really iffy, and the
Mhm.
90s, forget it. And then today it's like,
Yeah, so I know you stopped gaming for a while, so tell us a little bit about when you dropped out of gaming, why you dropped out of gaming, and when you
oh, you want to hear the chick stories, huh?
yeah, yeah. Let's hear the chick stories.
Well, well, I won't go into detail,
Right.
But in high school in the 80s, when you had big hair and you had a guitar and you were okay looking, you had all the chicks that you wanted. And when you've got, when you've got a harem happening, it's the last thing you're thinking about until you get home, because I did think about, D&D, and I became myself again, because really it was a persona that I created. That was like, in order to get chicks, I can't really talk about D&D, so I better pick up a guitar and put some hairspray in my hair
Right.
and start playing guitar. Well, it worked, and it was as sad as it is, that you have to look and act a certain way, and in order to get the chicks. It ultimately made my eyes open to what's fake, um, how easily manipulated people can be, and
Mhm.
then I started getting into the psychology of it, because I took psychology at the university level, and it was interesting. It was interesting to see, how the genders were different, how certain people from different areas acted different.
Yep.
And so I moved all over the United States. I went to 11 different high schools,
Right.
and I had to adjust myself accordingly in order to fit in, because everybody wants to fit in. So uh, Dungeons and Dragons became secondary. However, I did stay up with second edition. I even stayed up with third edition, and I was buying them and I was reading them because, well, I was just used to reading that type of material anyway, and I didn't want to feel like I was left behind if I were ever thrust into a game again. I wanted to be the guy that could protect my character with the rules, because I was
Right.
always used to that DM trying to kill me off. And so yeah, I read them, and even though I wasn't a regular player, I'd try to get in. I'd go into the game. Now the hobby stores started popping up
Right.
in the late 80s, early 90s.
Mhm.
And yeah, and I was at the university, and my university didn't really have that many D&D players, because Dungeons and Dragons somehow, some way, just kind of dropped off as being this thing. It wasn't cool to begin with, therefore why would you promote something that's really not that cool to play anyway? Well, these hobby shops started opening up, and they still carried the line. They
Mhm.
still carried the dice and all the figurines. So I'd stop in there and I'd sit down and say, hey, anybody interested in playing Dungeons and Dragons? And I'd get players here and there, and then finally Magic the Gathering came out, and these card games, and that's really when Dungeons and Dragons took second seat, maybe third, fourth, fifth seat to Pokemon and all these other little card games. And
Right.
that really discouraged me from wanting to get into that, because I was not that 8-year-old kid again. I was still 16, even though I was 24.
Yep.
I still had that 16-year-old that was like, I'm not 8 years old, I'm not playing these stupid card games, because they were stupid. I looked at them, I watched people play them, and it just seemed like watching grandma and grandpa playing cribbage, or something ridiculous that you go, I'm not wasting my time with this. This is I'll be 90 and then I can play maybe Magic the Gathering, but I'll be damned if I'm gonna sit there and flip cards over. And it just looked ridiculous to me. So I said no way. But I would always go in and I'd talk with the owner, or and after a while, because I've got big hair and I look like a rock star everywhere I go.
Mhm.
They'd look at me as like, "What are you doing in here?" So it was, I was no longer the original nerd. I was too cool for being in a hobby shop. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I'm like the original nerd here.
Yep.
And so it's weird how that generational thing happened. There was a rift that happened. Now now because I looked a certain way, I wasn't considered one of their nerds anymore. I looked too cool to belong in their store. So yeah, I eventually dropped it. So third edition wasn't a huge thing in my life. I played it here and there, but um, I was always looked at as, that guy. What the hell's he doing here? Um,
Yeah, so you never lost interest in it, but you just kind of dropped off naturally. I
I,
would say around 2000 or so.
yeah, I couldn't get in the game.
Yeah.
No, this was before that. No, I'd
Yeah.
say it was probably 93, 94.
And what
And
brought you back into the fold?
I I was always into it, and I'd come back to it because I had my box of D&D stuff, from way back. Still had my original books.
Yep.
So, uh, I'd pull them out. Now, I left for in 2003, I left for Europe. So, I was gone in Europe for 10 years. I come back, I bring my wife, 10 years later. This is 2013, and I get all my boxes that had been in storage at my parents'. I get them all back, and I bring them in, and I'm ripping through them, and sure enough, there's my Dungeons and Dragons stuff. And I'm struggling. I'm trying to find work. It was a tough time coming back from Europe.
Right.
Nobody in Europe played Dungeons. I never met anybody that really played Dungeons and Dragons like I did.
Oh,
And
yeah, really?
and so it was there wasn't even there were kids, that were like into it, but not, it wasn't a thing. There wasn't groups.
Right.
So when I came back, it was, I was interested in it again. I started going online, looking to see if there were, any Dungeons and Dragons groups. And in 2013, there wasn't a whole lot. There wasn't like a resurgence or anything like that. But by 2016, 2017, there was. It started coming back for some reason.
Yep.
And that's when I started getting into groups and speaking my mind, talking about the old school stuff, and that led me to start playing again.
Yeah, so you got back into it. Yeah, I guess you jumped back into 5th edition, right?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. I played 5th edition and had a group of guys, and we were advertising and bringing new people in, and it was awkward to say the least. Um, the one guy that I had was a Rollmaster guy, which was awesome. So me and him would play Rollmaster together, and we'd try to get people into it, but but you have to be of a certain mindset in order to play Rollmaster. You had to have played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. You had to have talked about mechanics. You had to be a master at understanding mechanics, balance, all kinds of things. Customizing a character, tactics, that kind of thing, in order to really get into Rollmaster. And so it was hard for us to find players that were 5th edition players because they had never even played 3rd edition or 2nd edition. It was 5th
Right.
edition.
Yeah.
Everybody was 5th edition. So
Yep. Whole new generation.
it was.
So I imagine that was quite a culture shock for you coming from the old school, where you basically skipped 3rd and 4th edition and coming straight into 5th edition.
Yeah. Culture shock to say the least. It was I was like some 90-year-old man, and this is figuratively, with a bunch of 12-year-olds. And it was really hard to relate to the style of play that they were playing. Hear these weird squeaky voices that were very uncomfortable in talking in these dwarvish voices with the accent, and I'm like, what are you doing? what are you doing, man? And that was their version of role playing, and it was like, what on earth is this? If you can't if you're not a master, and I had never heard of Critical Role.
Mm-hmm.
That happened like way later.
Yep.
I'm like, hey, you don't have to use that voice. I know it's not really that well. And I'm the kind of guy that will come out and say, hey, that voice sucks. You need to pick a different one. and boy, would I get, it just turn people off. I'm a kind of a bold. I'll say what's on my mind and maybe realize, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that later, But I'm honest, and people know I'm honest, and I'm generally a good person. I want people to have fun. I want the best for everybody. I don't want people to feel like they're uncomfortable, because I was always that uncomfortable kid way back when, trying to get people to play Dungeons and Dragons. So I have empathy, but
Absolutely.
but there's a cutoff where you go, look, you're just making everybody uncomfortable by these awful voices. Don't, let's just speak in normal voices and have fun. So I came from the personality of, some people were offended and too easily offended. And because I'd say something and, oh my God, the person wouldn't show up the next day. And, one of the guys would say, well, he said he's not showing up because you're too, this or that.
Mm-hmm.
You use too many curse words or whatever. And I was like, what? Okay, well, I'll, I'll watch what I say. But after a while, it was like I started realizing I'm having to change my personality to adjust so that I can make these people feel comfortable. And I never had to do that before. So it was kind of a new thing for me. I came
Right.
back to a country that had so many easily offended people where they couldn't even function in a group anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so this started making the realization of this. And I wasn't like coming back to my country realizing anything. I had just realized that my country had changed overnight, well, the 10 years, and is now a place that is very uncomfortable, and that there are people that are so judgmental and can't handle certain situations. And after a while, I just realized that, wow, it wasn't specifically me, and it wasn't specifically them. It was specifically, there was something around this fifth edition type of people that wanted to only play fifth edition. Because the people
Right.
that came to play Rollmaster with us, those dudes were cool. They were
Yep.
fine.
Yep.
It was the people that because we were advertising on Meetup. So we'd have, 5 or 6 people that would show up
Yeah.
at any given, once a week or a different, on any given time. And oh my God, these were like little babies that they couldn't handle anything.
Right.
And so, I'd get home and I'd go online and I'd start talking about, what the hell's up with fifth edition, da 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 da, in these fifth edition groups, in these other groups, like these so-called uncensored groups. And I would get bashed for calling this out. Like, what the hell's going on? And uh, it was a wake up call for me.
Right. So we're probably going to I've going to transition the conversation here, but I want to have Chase and Dave add in any other questions they had.
I was just kind of wondering, was there any um, particular adventure or event that happened in some of the original games that you really hold on to? It's a really special memory.
They were all, if no, because as they were let out, it wasn't like, all of them were there and we would go and pick them. We would follow the natural, the natural order of them. We always looked for, when we were first level, we'd look for the first level adventures, and we went through, B1, B2. So we went through kind of a natural progression. And as they got released, they started getting a little bit, a little bit more complex. But every one of them, and when I mean every single one, there wasn't one that we just went through that was like, oh, well, that stunk, because they were all special in their own way. Even, uh, the Expedition of the Barrier Peaks, even though that was kind of the weird one. a little science fictiony kind of stuff. It introduced us to that aspect of it. So, yeah, I went and actually got Top Secret, the game. So we started getting into different things as well. Um, you know, different games from TSR. TSR was always the kind of they were the front runner for any of those type of games. So everything TSR came out with, we were all excited about. Boot Hill, you name it, all of them. We were just happy to get them when we could get them, when we could afford them, and when all the students were in session buying snacks, I was able to get my modules.
Dave, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was curious. So, Dwayne, we talked about literary and music inspiration. What about movies? You had mentioned at first that it was really difficult to get into any movies. Maybe you didn't enjoy some of the animations of the earlier ones, but later on, did you find that you saw any either movies or shows that you said, "Yeah, that's it. Like that's what kind of inspires me for gaming or will help me game design."
Well, the 70s and 80s, we had oh gosh, some really bad ones. There was like can't really, some of the ones with Muppets in them. Obviously, the what was it, the crystal, the crystal, what was that
Dark
one?
Crystal.
The Dark Crystal.
The Dark Crystal. But you had a whole bunch of them that were like that. Heavy metal was huge for me. I mean, heavy metal, wizards. So it was always about a cartoon. I don't know. Ralph Bakshi just did kind of an amazing thing. Frank Frazetta came out with Fire and Ice.
Right.
Those were the go-to. And when you hear cult classics and cult movies, we didn't just watch them once and then boom, we were inspired. We watched them over and over and
Right.
over until we wore out the tape, and then we had to go buy a new beta or VHS tape and watch it again, and we'd wear out that one. And this was multiple bong hits, and again, sex, drugs, rock and roll, but we were still into our cult classics. And we'd have the midnight movies, so we'd go high to the midnight movies and watch. Pink Floyd The Wall was a very huge inspiration to, even though it may not seem like Dungeons and Dragons, it was very it had darkness to it. It brought in an introduction to evil and darkness and emotional sadness. So it brought in a lot. It had a
Absolutely.
huge impact on guys our age that were hanging out in the Trans Am, smoking bowls in the back, and listening to Pink Floyd over the tape. So yeah, all these things of the decade had the influence that gave us inspiration to continue, and we still continue. We're still 16, 17, 18 at heart. It's not like we change. I don't think we change as emotional guys or immaturity. I think if after 18 or 20 you change any more emotionally, uh, you know, then it's unique. But no, I'm still 18. I'm still that same kid. I just have different concerns now.
Oh, I understand that feeling. Like I still feel like this immature, teenager stuck in the body of an old man that hurts every day when I wake up.
Yeah, yeah, and then you have kids, and it's like, you know, you're just excited to be, play, have a play, have a
Right. I
playmate.
keep waiting for the day where I'm gonna wake up as the wise old man who has the answers to all the young people, but instead it's just I'm this young guy stuck in an old gray-haired dude's body.
Hey, man, I'm a grandfather. I'm still waiting for that to happen. So,
Right.
yeah.
So to transition just a little bit, I think all of us are a part of it, and I want to talk about it a little bit, and maybe give a little shout out to your Facebook group. I think it's a unique and awesome community you've built. Probably the most unique group internet group I've ever been a part of, just because everybody seems to be very close knit. We're all very good friends, and we've all became pretty close. And it's really interesting, this community you've built around you. And I want to talk to you about that. So, where did this start from? Where did the idea come from? What inspired you to do this? And what was your goal? And what's your future goals with it?
Well, thanks, Cody. I appreciate it. I don't look at it as my group. It's always looked at as our group. I've never referred, and rarely do I refer to it as my group. It's our group, and you can ask anybody when I talk about the group. It is our group. It's like our neighborhood. I picture it as, I want my neighborhood to be filled with those same guys that I had, that we'd all sneak out of our bedrooms, 12 at night while our parents are sleeping, and we'd rush off to the university, and we'd game. And that's really why I think the group has become what it is because that's what it's like for me, is to, when my wife goes to bed, I get to come and rush on the computer and head to, our group, and talk about D&D, even play D&D. If there's guys here in Discord now playing Dungeons and Dragons, setting things up, and uh, it's exciting. It's like it's happening all over again, and it's the resurgence of the old school way of things, where I don't have to worry about offending anybody. And how the group started was really from the disconnect of the generation of those kids that I was playing with in fifth edition. I'd run downtown, and we'd meet at a coffee shop, and we'd be playing, and there was always some really uncomfortable moment that I
Right.
didn't like, and I'd come back and I'd talk about it on the other groups. Well, the other groups, I'd get attacked for it, even bringing it up. And after I've been kicked out of, 8 or 9 different groups because they didn't like what I said, I think the last group, what started the ball rolling in my court was, was just a funny comment of, hey, how do you make a troll, even scarier? And I said something like, put a pink pussy hat on it. and boy, did I get attacked. I mean, like, I was attacked so bad, and I was kicked out of the group. And when I was kicked out, I wasn't fully kicked out yet. I was being told I was being kicked out of the group. So I went to a couple guys. I said, hey guys, I'm creating my own group. This group sucks.
Right.
and, um, and sure enough, you'll see the guys that, uh, you know, I don't want to name any names, because if this goes out and everybody recognizes names and such, but I don't
Yeah.
want to get anybody
Yeah.
like,
No,
because
you
they
don't
helped
have
me
to.
start the group. But certainly I call them out in my group, and I am very proud of the guys that are still in the group, because they were there from day one. And
Yeah.
they followed me from that group, left that group to follow me to create this group. And, they actually left it. They didn't just say, well, I'll join your group as well. They left it. They said, this group sucks too. We're leaving. So they
Yeah.
came and they started talking to me, and we were just started out 2 guys, then 4 guys, then 10 guys, then 20 guys. And it stayed for, very small for a long time. But we had a great time. Um, there were no rules in my group. We could talk about anything. And that's kind of how that all got started. Was I'm not I'm not an admin. I'm not a dictator. I'm just one of the members that enjoys being a part of a group as well. And so I just started something with a little bit different rule system, where it was more open. And if you're offended, all I asked was that you don't cry. And if you do cry, go find a corner to cry in, and then come back later and
Right.
rub some dirt on it, and you'll be fine. And I, for some reason, got a bunch of guys that were fully capable of that. And now we're reaching 3,000, and every guy in this group uh, is that way, and understands when they get in this group, that is the way that it will be. There's no crying, there's no reporting, of, oh, I'm offended. There's none of that. And that is the old school way. It's like we were in our neighborhood when somebody said something to one of the other kids, you fought it out, and
Yep.
we still remained friends, and we all appreciated being around each other, and that's how I perceive this group.
Yeah, I think you've created a really unique community. I mean, I've been in thousands of internet groups, uh, Facebook groups, MySpace groups, whatever, and forums, and I've never seen anything quite like what you've created here. I think it's a really unique and intimate experience. I've definitely created a lot of close friends here.
Yeah.
It's been
Yeah.
quite awesome, and yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to what you've made here.
Well,
Um,
thanks, man. That makes, when I hear things like that, and yeah, there's a bunch of guys that have said that personally to me, that, in private messages, and it just makes me feel like I created an environment where it's like the neighborhoods we all grew up in the 70s, and it is truly old school D&D.
yeah,
Even though we talk about new things, that we do talk about new things, and we certainly can talk about politics without um without too much of a disagreement. I think we've all got, this group has um the best, most mature guys that I've ever met, and they can handle disagreements, they can handle different opinions, they can discuss mechanics without getting into these ridiculous things that I see in all the other groups. And that's why, you get people that want to get in that have caused problems in other groups that just cannot get in the group, because you can see by profiling them that they have some issues. And I make sure that people that enjoy causing chaos and havoc in a group, they're not welcome in our group. And if they do get in, they quickly find out that it's not the group for them, because the more mature guys seem to win over the argument a lot.
right. Um, so, um, speaking of the group, we're just talking about the group. What is the group called? Because there's going to be some people that listen to this that have no idea what group we're talking about. Get a little shout out to what the group is, where they can join this group, and I will give a disclaimer that not everybody's going to make the group. But go ahead, Dwayne. Tell us, what the group is, what it's called, and how they can join this unique community.
Yeah, so it's called Old School Dungeons and Dragons, and it is what it is. It goes by OSR D&D on Facebook, and I'm sure people have seen it. I'm sure there's many people that have tried to get in that are a little bit upset that they couldn't get in. But I do a little background research on people, and the one thing that has always been is that if you have any hatred in your heart and you certainly express it through Facebook, it's probably not the right group for you. There are other groups out there that you will find other people that have the exact same type of hatred towards whatever it is that you don't like, and I just don't allow that. We don't have any hate in our heart for anybody or
Right.
anything. We may disagree with certain things, but we don't express them openly. We certainly don't advertise them on Facebook, even though some of us have personal ideas, and that's where we all can disagree. We agree to disagree, and we do it very well. And the guys that are handpicked from the requests are guys that I have personal conversations with through the vetting process. A lot of these guys in here will come to you and tell you, yes, I've had a long conversation with Duane. He vetted me for an hour. We had a conversation for an hour, and I've done this.
Yep.
And Cody, I think you'll attest to it. You've been in that situation,
Absolutely.
and it works. And it's not like we find like-minded people. We just find people that can have a conversation, even though, and I'll test them on, I'll say, hey, how do you feel about this, something that is so controversial, and see how people behave. And it's all about behavior. And I like people that know how to behave in a group, and it seems to work great. And I'm proud of everybody that's in the group because, you know, when you're in other groups, you lose a sense of humanity. You lose faith in humanity. Like in the some of the fifth edition groups, there are just too many virtue signalers out there, and I don't like that. I don't think anybody is more virtuous than anybody. It doesn't matter. I don't care if you're a racist, a white supremacist. It doesn't matter. It all that matters is that we talk about D&D, that you
Right.
can behave like a good person. You can respect people and their opinions. You don't throw out your opinion to anybody, and that's what I look for in people.
Yeah.
And and we've done a really good job at doing that. And there's been very few incidents over the past year. And what are we at now? Year and 5 months. We're going on almost a year and a half.
Yep.
The incidents have been like nothing. You can look at my you can look at the numbers and see that we've been consistently growing in popularity. And I hope that we can keep that up. And certainly, hopefully, we can get guys that can come on Discord and share conversations there, because I think it's the next level in really getting to know somebody. If you've ever done online dating, you message people and then
Right.
you well, this is the next level. You can talk to people now.
Yep.
You don't have to use video, although it does have video now, I noticed.
Yep.
So you can just come in and talk to somebody. You don't have to stay for more than 30 seconds if you don't want, but you just come in and say, hey, I just thought I'd stop by and say hello. And so that's kind of where I see the next level of this going. Is we've been starting a bunch of games inside of Discord. We actually have promotion where people are promoting the Discord server just by tossing $5 to help push the server to allow the bit rate of the calls and the conversations to be a lot better. So instead of having a
Yeah.
512 megabit uh, per second, we've got now, I think it's, what is it, 1024 or something like that.
Yeah.
But it just helps push a better what do you call it? I don't know, better scenario where you can share files. So you can upload files here. You can have a high quality connection. It's just the best. It's better than Skype, way better than Skype.
Oh yeah. I think it's the best of both worlds.
It is. You can share desktops,
Yep.
so you can see what's going on in somebody else's, or you can show somebody what you're doing. It's just
Throw
fantastic. And
music in.
What's that?
You could throw music in.
Oh, absolutely. We've got the rhythm bot. We've got Sidekick where you can roll dice and you can see what the person rolled. So you can have an online game in a private room. You create your own private room. So it's a great medium for doing what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to the old school D&D group on Facebook, and the Discord especially. I think has really connected us all. And just a round of applause to Duane for putting that together. It's been an awesome group and community to be a part of, and I'm honored to be a part of it. And I think everybody else, Dave and Chase, is too.
Yeah, thanks guys. You guys really, I mean, this isn't all me. This is a community, and you guys really have made it what it is. Even like Mike Rosso was an admin for a long time. He did a great job. It is a lot of work. So
Yep.
when somebody like you, Cody, and Dave, you come in and you help me with things, I am so grateful, because it is a lot of work. It becomes a full-time job, and you can ask some of the other admins in the other, like Eric Tenkar. I'm sure he knows very
Yeah.
well what it is to run. So I think he's got something like 10,000 guys. It's crazy.
Oh yeah.
But his is a mixture of things that I'm not comfortable with, and that's fine. I mean, it works for him, but for me, I don't I don't want to pussyfoot around talking about certain subjects. He
Right.
has to. I don't have to. We can talk about sex, drugs, and rock and roll right here if you want to. That's my Discord, and that's my
Absolutely.
Facebook group. The other Facebook groups, you have to be careful. It's politically correct, and that works fine for some people. Here,
Yeah.
it's old school, and we can share beautiful centerfolds of Playboys if we want to in
Oh,
Discord,
yeah.
not on Facebook, on Discord. So it's
Yeah.
the rated R version, I suppose you could say. It's more rated R. I wouldn't allow a 13-year-old kid to come in and
No.
pretend. This is more for adults, for sure.
It is. And yeah, we're gonna have Mike on here. Um, maybe the next episode or a couple episodes in. Um, he's quite the character, but he's an old school guy. Um, he
Yeah,
loves to
man.
talk, and we're definitely gonna have him on at some point.
Yeah, we
Or
got
even,
so many characters in this group
yeah,
that it is you have a lot of resource to have a lot of different conversations. And if I can, when I can, I'll come in and be a part of it. And but certainly you can grab, like people like Rich and Kelly. There's a whole bunch of guys you can choose from.
absolutely.
George, just
Yeah, we've been going for a while, but I'm gonna keep going. I want to change the tone a little bit. I want everybody to join in this conversation. Um, and we're gonna start off with this conversation. What is old school gaming to you? And since Dwayne is the guest of honor, I'm gonna hand it to him first.
what is old school gaming to me? Uh, it's an attitude. It really is. It's an attitude. It's none of this stuff that happens today that I'm just, and it's going to sound like negative Nancy, but I don't like worrying about, oh, I'm going to hurt this person's feelings. We're all guys. We've been in locker rooms, we've been in bars, we've been drunk together. We've, said things later the next day. We go, oh shit, I need to just apologize. But that's where old school gaming is, where we can just be ourselves, not worry about the filter. If we have to come back the next day, we say we're sorry, and it is what it is. And most of the guys will accept an apology and say, that's all right, it's cool. That's the attitude. That's being guys, being laughing at things that we
Yeah.
used to laugh at in the 70s and 80s. I mean, today people don't laugh at that stuff anymore. They're offended by it, and they want to shut it down. They want to close it off. They want to erase it from history. And I'm offended by that. So that's the stuff that offends me. And that's, being old school is having these conversations while we're
Right.
playing, while we're drinking, and just having a really good time, and laughing at the corny stuff guys say.
Yeah. Dave, what's old school gaming to you?
I heard that question so many times, and after having researched so much about Gary Gygax, Tim Kask, Mar Barker, and the guys that played with them, and and even Dave Arneson, and like what inspired Dave Arneson, right? And it comes
Yep.
to the point where, to me, old school is just having the confidence to play the game the way that you and your group wants to play it, without giving a damn about what anybody else says.
Well said, sir.
Here.
If you were to find out that in this world, and I'm just going to pull a number out of my ass, that there were 100,000 gamers, and I can only hope that there's more than that, then to me, old school would be to find out that there's 100,000 people playing any amount of games different ways, just everybody doing it their way, tinkering with the rules, tinkering with systems, tinkering with styles of play,
Yep.
and just doing what works for them.
Absolutely. Chase, what's old school gaming to you?
I very much agree that it's more of a mentality than anything. It's about making sure that you're gathering around with people that you can trust. We've got enough stuff to deal with our everyday lives, with work, with jobs, with relationships, and sometimes just being able to get into the game and not have to worry about, oh, if I do this one person's character, they're gonna throw a fit and cry, and that it just adds another level. It's about knowing that you can trust the people that you're gaming with, and just basically having a fun time. And sometimes even that means just throwing stuff at the wall to see which game you're playing, just to see what sticks.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, for myself, old school gaming, yeah, I agree with all the points you guys said. It absolutely resonates with me. 100% true. Um, I think another thing I'd add is I'm kind of an intangible kind of guy. I'm definitely a right-minded kind of person. I'm very abstract the way I think. And old school gaming for me has always been um, I will add that it's kind of an aesthetic. I've always been an aesthetic kind of guy, whether it be art, music, even looking at those old school books and such, just the mystery in the air that surrounds them. And I think it's a feel, right? It's kind of like jazz. It's a feeling, and it's not just mechanics or the way you play or an attitude. It's always been kind of an aesthetic and a feel for me. And it's definitely old school gaming has always had this distinct feel to it that I don't feel like modern gamers understand. Um, but that's kind of how I feel about old school gaming. It's very different when I open up the first edition player's handbook or dungeon master's guide or monster manual, and when I pick up a fifth edition player's handbook and monster manual or player's hand or whatever. Um, it doesn't have the same feeling. It doesn't bring up the same emotions. It doesn't conjure up the same imaginative ideas, right? So
Well,
that's kind of what else could.
a lot of that old artwork, it felt more like somebody was, trying to draw it off of something they had seen one time, and now, it wasn't as much of just a mass-produced thing that it is now.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
The black and white images were um there was something about the black, like Tramp and Roslov. You look at the black and white images, and they more quickly evoked an emotion and an amount of mystery, and it had the detail in it that you could really associate with. Whereas when you saw a colored version,
right.
it didn't it filled in the blanks too much for you. It didn't
Ri
leave an amount of mystery to it. It didn't You couldn't close your eyes, and it was there. The image was there, and you kind of went, okay. Those front covers, they were color, but you were more intrigued by opening up the page and start looking at some of the black and white art that would create the mystery and not fill in the blanks for you. That's why a lot of my art is black and white. I leave it black and white. It will always be black and white unless it's a cover of something. But I think that is really what captured that old Dungeons and Dragons. That's why it still remains very intriguing to a lot of people. Some of them are
Yeah.
very simple, but yet it doesn't fill in all the blanks for you. You're responsible for filling those blanks in with color and with imagination and stuff like that. So
Well, I love the old black and white art, but I will say, I came from the generation of Larry Elmore, Jeff Easley, Clyde Caldwell, Keith Parkinson, and even though I at the same time I was introduced to first edition around the same time, so I saw all that black and white art, and I picked up the BX, and saw, Jeff D and uh, Earl Otis and all that, it was really the Four Horsemen for me that really really fired off my imagination, wanted me to play the game. You know,
Yeah, Jeff Easley certainly, um, he was probably one of the greats. I mean, he was there from first edition. I think he was,
oh yeah,
Easley was there from first edition. So, when they started getting into the, putting in more money into the art printing process, that's when color started kind of coming out. It was getting a little bit cheaper to produce. Um, but that was a natural transition. I don't think those had as much impact as the first edition. Honestly, even the second edition. You look at the second edition. They were great, no doubt,
yeah,
no doubt they were great. Um, but I don't think that they had the same spark of intrigue that the first edition has. And that's just me. Maybe that's me because it was when
yeah,
I first saw it, I was like, wow, even those Frazetta, even when I look at the Frazetta books from the 70s,
yep,
as you turn them, you can look at all the color ones. Those are amazing.
hmm,
But really, when you see his black and whites,
oh yeah,
there's something about them that makes you look at them more to try and fill in the color yourself, or the action sequence is there. It's you're translating more,
right.
whereas with a color image you're not translating as much. It's kind of a snapshot in time, like a photograph, and it doesn't do what a black and white does.
Yeah,
I,
no,
I,
I hear you. I think it's whatever you come from. There's probably some kids now that, well, I can't imagine why, because it's good, but that are inspired by,
I
the modern fifth edition and Pathfinder shit or whatever. But
no, that's
what grabbed me was the Larry Elmores and the Keith Parkinsons, Jeff Easley. When I saw those beautiful full color spreads in the second edition books, I mean, it wasn't the game that grabbed me; it was the art. And when I saw that, I was like, "What is this? I want to be a part of it." You know.
A
And
lot
then
had
of
to do with
course,
the color palettes were different back then also that they used.
absolutely. Yeah, and I think those guys, the thing about them was, they really you could it was like a story they were telling in their art. When you look at a Larry Elmore or a Keith Parkinson or a Clyde Caldwell, what have you, and even those early guys like Trampier and Jeff D and Earl Otis, when you look at that shit, it really brings you into a story. It tells a story, and it sucks you in, and you want to be a part of that. You know, and I don't feel that from modern role playing game art. When I look at it, I just feel empty. I'm like, oh, it's a fighter, fighting an orc or whatever. It doesn't really do anything for me. But those, I think, all the way up to until the '90s, it really, those guys really knew how to tell a story through art. They were real artists. You know, and I mean, that's what got me into the game was the art.
absolutely same here.
Well, do we have anything else to add about, I we got off on some kind of art thing here, which is fine.
It's
It's
important,
great.
man. The art
It
is
is.
incredibly important, and
It is.
it'd be fun to do another a full like thing on the artwork. To where we've got we can push an image up, and we can have a discussion about a specific artist, and show all their art, and
Oh, I would love to.
yeah, that'd
Yeah.
be fun. That'd be a fun one to do.
Yeah, I'm a big art fan, and like I said, it was the art that got me into gaming in general. That's what drew me in. If it wasn't for the art, I wouldn't be a gamer today.
Well, let's
And
do a top 20 artists of fantasy. It doesn't have to be just Dungeons and Dragons, but
oh
certainly
yeah,
because even some of those artists were very aware of Dungeons and Dragons, and they even did, you know, they did some stuff for Dungeons and Dragons. So we should do something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll definitely do an episode of that. Yeah, we kind of got off topic, but I think that's fine. Um, I think we had some interesting points here. Does anybody else have anything to add before we close out the evening?
I just want to say thanks, Cody, for starting this whole thing, and I look forward to going to your channel and listening to a bunch of the different people that are in our group and even outside of our group to listen to some of your interviews. So thanks for doing this. I appreciate it, and look forward to having more of these.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for creating this community. If it wasn't for this, um, you know, I wouldn't have started doing this, to be honest. I wouldn't have been
You got it,
inspired
man.
to do it. So
I'm happy to have you, and happy to have all you guys in it, and you make the group what it is, and it's successful, and that's important. It's fun and it's successful.
Chase, Dave, you guys have anything to add before we close out the evening?
I think I'm good.
No, I think we've hit a perfect conclusion.
All right. Well, this has been the Grognard Gamers, Cody Broussard, and
Chase.
yeah, Chase Green, Dave Ferguson. Thanks very much, Duane, for coming on and being our guest for the evening.
Thank you,
And
guys.
next time, we will be doing another episode, hopefully pretty soon. And don't forget to subscribe to us on Twitter and YouTube, the Grognard Gamers. We will be doing a lot of live streams of different games. Right now, we are doing a Dark Sun stream on Twitter and YouTube, which Dave and Chase and maybe even Duane will appear in the future.
I think that's going to happen, man.
All right, excellent. And without further ado, thanks for joining us, and everybody have a good night.
Night, everybody.
Take care.
Good night, guys.